Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Monde speaking here. Welcome to our webinar. Firstly, just a special mention to the Load Research Chapter members, as well as the Executive Committee of the Load Research Chapter. We would like to welcome you. My name is Monde Soni. I'm the chairman of the Load Research Chapter within SAIEE. The topic that we have for you today that will be presented is the impact of COVID-19 on economic and electrical demand. Now, just to go through some housekeeping rules. Attendees are reminded to ensure that the volume is turned up on their devices. So that's basically your computer, your smartphone, etc. that you are using. Ensure that you have stable internet connection. This will ensure the streaming and audio will run smoothly. Attendees can ask questions via question panel, which is located within the GoToWebinar control panel. By default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat function is available for webinar organizers and panelists to communicate with attendees. Attendees will not be able to chat with each other. However, you are encouraged to ask questions using that facility. A recording of the presentation will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel, which is called SAIEE TV on YouTube. The recording will also be made available on the SAIEE website under the Events tab, drop-down menu in the section Past Events and Webinar. This page is updated regularly, so ensure you check back as often as possible for new uploads and subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few days after this webinar has run. Now, about the presenter, our presenter today is Alois van Deventer, as you can see on the screen. Just briefly about Alois, she is an electrical engineer by qualification, and currently she's occupying a position of a senior manager for load forecasting and research at Eskom. The outputs of this area focus on medium and long-term forecasting for South Africa from a national and regional perspective. Alois is a strategic thinker, and she is also able to think strategically. She puts information together in a meaningful, practical way that enables solutions and unblocks technical challenges. She holds a master's in electrical engineering. She is an SAIEE member. She is a member of GO15 working groups, a CGRE working groups member. She is also professionally registered with EXA. So I would like to hand over to you, Alois, to take us through your delivery for today. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you so much, Monde. Thank you for the South African Institute of Electrical Engineering colleagues, the team members, and the Load Research Chapter in particular for this opportunity. And greetings to everybody that is attending tonight. As was mentioned, I'm going to turn off the webcam. I hope you can all still hear me very well. Let me carry on. I'm talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and electrical demand. South Africa has severely felt the impact of COVID-19 from a demand and economic perspective. We have seen the economic projections of a shrinking economy by at least an additional 7.2%, and it's the lowest that it has been in 90 years. And it's evidence of the devastating effect that the disruptor COVID-19 had on the economy. From an electricity demand perspective, one of the key aspects that gives guidance to electricity utilities to manage constraints and to prepare the power system for these kind of deviations, impact-wise, that's an important aspect that we'll be looking at tonight as well. And we will also be talking about the relationship between demand and economic activity. The topics that will be covered briefly in the discussion for this evening is the assumptions and scope of this particular discussion for tonight, the demand view, we'll talk about the GDP sectoral view, the Eskom sectoral contributions, the regional demand view, and then a way forward or a so what discussion. The assumptions and scope that is covered for tonight, it compares the demand and economic impact in South Africa from March to June 2020 due to the COVID-19 impact. The demand projections are from the system operator, and they are informed by assumptions such as the return to school, the economic level recovery, the relaxation levels of the lockdown, seasonal impact, and the winter tariff. The normal demand projection used for this particular webinar is as per the base forecasted in February 2020, as per the system operator. The data sources used are from SAIEE and Eskom, and will be as indicated in the presentation. The view in this presentation is limited to the South African impact only. No global impact is considered, even though some global information on particular events are covered or they are mentioned. This presentation excludes power system supply constraints or any load shedding scenarios or events. And I have to acknowledge my team and the significant contributions that have come from the forecasters in grid planning and development and system operator, namely Boitumelo Ramagiana, Yana Briet, Moonlight Mbata, and Lucinda Nang. From a monthly demand perspective, looking at the monthly, the peak demand, so what you're seeing here is in March, this was prior to COVID. So the comparison is between the forecasted February 2020 data, and the gray ones is the actual demand that we saw for 2020 for March, April, May, and June. To note here is the demand reductions that we have seen for April when we had lockdown level 5. We saw a 12% demand reduction. For May, there was an 8% reduction. And the interesting one is June, where the lockdown level was released to level 3. And we have seen a 2% deviation between what was forecasted in February 2020 data compared to the actual that we have seen for the month of June. Also to note, the reason why we have decided to use the forecasted 2020 demand data is because it was of interest to note the impact considering the growth for 2020 as well. So what you're seeing here from a deviation perspective is the growth projected for 2020. Let's say we did not have COVID, and then when we had COVID, what was that percentage reduction? This particular slide talks to the demand, the sectoral contributions from an Eskom perspective as defined by Eskom in the months, and we looked at this from a January till June period. Now, from January to March is the period where we had pre-COVID, and I'm just going to pause on the period from March to April, looking at the contributions and how they have increased. So the dark blue is the redistributor contribution. We can see that in the month of April, it has increased by about 3%, and overall from March to June, we can see that there has been an increase in that particular sector. Then from the commercial sector contributions, you'll see that we've seen a decline, which was expected, because we have seen the reduction largely impacted the commercial and the industrial sectors. You'll see the similar trend in mining, where you see from March it was a 13%, and then it reduced to 10, and then you can see an increase in the month of May. Remember, that was level 4. So in the month of May, mines were reintroduced and there was activity that was allowed again. And then you see the increase in June. And the interesting point about this one as well is the fact that in June, we generally have our winter tariff starting, which largely impacts industry, and mining would be one of them that would be impacted significantly. So what we would generally see is that there is a decline in usage for this particular sector. But the interesting point is that for June, and it's possible that it could be due to the lockdown effect, that we've actually seen an increase in that particular sector. Residential, starting in March, starting from 11%, increasing to a 14% as the lockdown started, and then you can see the levels relaxed. And in June, you almost saw a typical pre-COVID residential sector. And remembering that in June, most people have returned to work as well. So you can definitely see the correlation between the residential sector increasing as the lockdown started, and the increase in the redistributor as well. And I'm talking about the residential sector here, but I'm contextualizing it within the Eskom direct supply customers. So the residential and the commercial sectors that I'm referring to here is the portion that is directly supplied to Eskom. This also still has to be taken into the bigger picture, and then there's more residential impact, which is not discussed in this particular one on the slide here. Also to note is that the international and classes are excluded in the demand contribution in this graph. And this one is in percentage contributions. Another one that I wanted to point out was the agriculture sector. So looking at March, you can see that it was a 4%, and then it increased to about a 5%, dropping off to a 4 and to a 3. Typical of the agricultural sector to drop off in the period of June, because it's cyclical and seasonal, very much seasonal. So those are the interesting points to keep in mind as we go through the rest of the webinar. What we're talking about now is the South African GDP sectors, and what we have looked at is the comparison of Q1 2020 compared to Q4 2019, and already the data that is out has shown that there has already been a contraction of 2% in the GDP, looking at last year, end of the year, compared to the beginning of this year, and this was prior to COVID. So the sectors that we have seen a reduction in is mining significantly from a primary sector perspective, and then we have seen reductions in manufacturing, electricity, and construction. Tertiary has shown an increase. So the key insight for this particular one is the fact that we looked at the trend for the last 5 years, and we have generally seen a decline. There's generally in Q1, the GDP has shown a decline, and there was a recovery in the second quarter. So generally, the trend has been that it increases. While due to COVID, probably there's an anticipation that we could see a further decline, but the Q2 results are not out yet. For the GDP breakdown of the predominant sector in contributions from an economic perspective, and the source of this particular data is Stats SA for 2020, the finance and business services has been the highest contributor, 20%. Then there was government, and then trade was 15%, manufacturing 13%. To note here is that construction was a 4% and agriculture was a 2%. Now, if you think about the lockdown levels, you'll remember that, if you recall, in lockdown level 5, it was only essential services. In lockdown level 4, we had finance and business services that was reintroduced, the sectors that was allowed. And you can actually see there is a little bit of a correlation with the lockdown levels as they were eased and the GDP sectors as they are defined here. This particular slide gives us information on the provincial GDP breakdown of the predominant sector contributions for the various provinces. So this slide gives context to the next one, which is the regional demand view that I'm going to be talking about. So I want you to note the following. So I must mention that the Stats SA data is still 2018, and it's the latest data that we have, even though it is intensely outdated. But to note here is the Northwest province, where the mining sector is at 33.3% contribution. The Northern Cape, where the mining contribution is high as well from a GDP perspective. So on this slide, what we did here, we looked at what is the regional demand levels and the impact from a regional perspective due to COVID-19. On the left-hand side, you can see, on my left-hand side, you can see that we're showing the lockdown levels. Then we are showing you the various months. and it's a heat map. So it shows you as the colors, the red means that the demand has contracted to that particular level. So I'm going to use a typical example, and I'm just going to talk about 3 provinces for this particular slide. About the Northwest. The Northwest is predominantly a mining sector, and the mines in that area, they're gold and platinum mines. So if you look at the recovery levels for the Northwest, you'll see that on a level 5, and I'm going to just use numbers to illustrate the point. Let's say this was a 60% as a dark red, because it's less than 70%. So let's say this one was 60. For level 4, you'll see that the levels was, as the level was east, the production increased. So Northwest was doing about 70%, and I'm using worst case. It's about doing 70% of what it normally do from a demand perspective. And if you look at level 3, you'll see that, let's say they were about 80%. So they went from 60, 70 to 80. Typical of what you would be expecting as the lockdown levels were eased and as they were allowed to produce more, you would see then that they were then increasing their production. Looking at the Northern Cape, the interesting thing that can be noticed here is that when the lockdown level 5 was introduced, their production levels were still high. They were doing about 95% or 90% of their consumption. That's what they were consuming. For level 4, so let's say level 5 was a 90, level 4, I'm using worst case, was a 60, and level 3 was around, it's about 80. It's an interesting one. You'll see that if you plot this out, it has a dip of a V shape, in that you would expect that in level 4. And I must also mention that Northern Cape is a mining sector predominantly as well. They have diamond, iron ore, and manganese. And so it is an interesting recovery that we're seeing here, and something that we have been looking into, and we have not conclusively found answers in it. But there are speculations around what could potentially cause this kind of contraction, or what could be causing this kind of recovery, including things like it could be that production was held back, or that there wasn't opportunities to export, etc., etc. And then the last one that I want to pause on, a region, is the Western Cape region. So the Western Cape is known to be predominantly agricultural. So you would expect that the sector that is strongly contributing to the demand in this particular one is agriculture. And if you look at how they were recovering, or what the impact was from a lockdown perspective, you'll see that in level 5, and I'm going to use worst case again. Let's say this was about 80%, because it's a lightish reddish color. 80%, then they actually in level 4 increased production to around about a 90, which was expected because the level was eased. But then the interesting one comes in level 3, where now we see that they are dropping back to what they were doing in level 5. I'm just going to say that it could be that it could be due to the agriculture, but it is another province that we are having to look at more deeper. What is sitting behind that? Why is the recovery level so different for these provinces here? Because if you look at the rest of the country, they were doing more or less Northern Cape and Western Cape. If you look at the rest of the country, they were doing as we would be expecting. As the levels are easing, consumption is increasing. So what we are illustrating on this particular slide is you can see a slight V-shaped recovery here. If you look at this is March. Let me just put the rest up. This is March, this is April, this is May, and this is June. There's a slight little bit of a dip, so it looks like it could potentially be a V type of recovery. I'm mentioning to you on the timeline, I'm indicating the things to keep in mind of what happened during this period from a COVID-19 impact perspective. On the 26th of March, this was when when the lockdown was declared by the president. And then in the period of this is April, we were in lockdown level 5. The only things that were allowed was essential services. Excuse me, to keep in mind was that 46.4% of businesses was closed during this time. Only 9% of businesses were operating in full capacity, and this data is according to Stats SA. And to note here, just to keep in the back of your mind, is that the global oil price collapse, we saw that it was around the 20th, 22nd of April. For the month of, this is April, so for the month of May, to note is that the things that was allowed, we had more sectors that was reintroduced, more operations that started up. We had finance services, mines and exports to mention as a point to remember. But still, 20% of businesses were closed and 26% of businesses were operating at full capacity. Then in lockdown level 3, even more sectors were opened, the alcohol ban was lifted, and schools reopened on the 1st of June. So what I'm showing you here is just a glimpse into what and this particular discussion is just demand related. There's no energy comparison or any energy, there's no energy context in this particular one. So to note here was just the typical profiles that we saw for March, April, May, and then in June. In March, this was pre-COVID, typical summer profile. You see a little bit of a morning peak, evening peak, and not really much of a muchness during the middle of the day. So remembering that in this particular one, prior to COVID, we had all the sectors contributing significantly in its normal capacity. Then in the month of April and May, if you look at the profiles, you'll see that these two profiles, they are typical of what we would normally see over a weekend. You'd see a little bit of a morning, not much of a morning peak. And remember in level 5, we had a particularly severe lockdown where most businesses were operating from home. Some businesses were not in operation, so there were significant reductions in commercial and industry, whereas residential, instead of businesses being operated and doing business in commercial buildings, it was now shifted to the house. In May, we had a similar situation, and you can actually see that it shows a less aggressive peak in the evening specifically, remembering that more sectors was introduced, so the contribution of what was in this particular demand here is commercial, a little bit of commercial, because not most of the commercial businesses was not in operation, commercial buildings, but there were definitely industry that was increased in the month of May. And then the last one is then in the month of June, where you can now see that it moves to a typical weekday profile and typical for a winter peak, a winter profile. And what you would be expecting is that, yes, there is a little bit of a pickup in the morning, a little bit of a steepness to it, and you do have the evening peak increase, and also remembering that now there are more sectors, so the contributions for the base of what you were seeing in this demand was not just residential, there were others as well. And then in terms of, I am concluding, in terms of a way forward, or so what is all of this telling us, or what can we do with this information? How is it useful? So the national demand impact can clearly be seen when you're looking at the contraction in the electricity consumption and definitely the economic activity as well. So what comes from this is that if you look at the sectoral contributions to the peak of the daily profiles prior and during the lockdown levels, there's definitely some work that we can put into that. Looking at how demand was shifted from commercial, where you have a lot of commercial buildings being empty, not the load reduced significantly, the air conditioning load that is not present at all. And then now it moves into the residential space where the residential consumption is increasing, but not just the residential consumption, it also increases the redistributors, because the predominant amount of the residential consumption is within the redistributor. So this can give us a clue into, if you're looking at future investments, pending the impact of COVID, and pending what happens at the end of the year, if the economy recovers completely and we have demand being returned completely to where we know as pre-COVID levels, it gives insights to the sectoral contributions. That's more detailed work that we still need to look at. And also from a managing the power system constraint, looking at the sectoral contributions can give good guidance if you're looking at reductions or strategies to mitigate if there are challenges in that area. Then from a regional demand recovery perspective, looking at the 3 distinct regions, the Northwest, the Northern Cape, and the Western Cape, one of the key observations for that particular one is the fact that within a sector, you even saw the different recoveries, which can also give you guidance in terms of if there are constraints, and it's also something that we need to unpack a little bit more. If there are constraints, is it constraint related, is it a production issue, or what sits behind that, what informs that? But definitely that from a sectoral contribution or a response, the differences in those sectors. Other focus areas is the demand shift across the various sectors, such as commercial, industry, residential, due to the work from home policy implemented by most companies. It would be interesting to see what the electricity bill for most consumers what has happened and how they have mitigated in terms of an increase to the electricity bill, what are the innovative ways that they came up with curbing usage or increasing usage or shifting things or however that has happened. And together with that is the distributed generation. So as the consumers has felt the impact from electricity bill perspective, is it so that more people have opted to put more PV panels? What is the distributed generation impact? Is there any impact? Can it be quantified? Should it be quantified? Is it strategies that we should look at for the future? How do we incorporate that in going forward? And then future collaborations to strengthen, develop, and integrate approaches and information to form a holistic view of the future of South Africa from electricity demand, power system impact, and the economic impact. So taking all of these things and how do we form a coherent view of what the future should look like, electricity demand perspective and the economy. What should be the investments? What about consumer behavior? Areas to identify shifts in consumer behavior, areas to identify shifts in future investments, whereas before maybe the option was to invest in large commercial buildings, and now it could be that maybe we should invest in something different because it can give guidance to that as well. And then in summary, I think the last point is just that the impact of all of these changes on forecasting as the world around us is changing. COVID disrupted our lives significantly. And then forecasting, how does it change the landscape? What should we think about? How do we regroup ourselves, re-navigate the forecasting? And I'm not just talking forecasting from an electricity demand perspective, I'm talking forecasting in general as a future. Should we be talking about forecasting for the economic impact, GDP-wise? So those are the key points, I think, that I want to leave with you to think about, and the contributions of the work that we have done here, how it can assist in us paving the way of what our future should look like. Thank you so very much. Monde, over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Alois. Yeah, quite insightful presentation there. So colleagues, I see that we already have quite a few questions that have been posted on the chat box there for your attention, Alois. So I will go through them. We'll go through them from the first one that we received, and we'll see how many questions we can cover. I do realize that we still have quite a bit of time, so we will be able to go through several questions. If you do have a question, just again, please post it on the chat box, and we'll make efforts to ensure that it gets responded to. So the first question was from Hilton Bartman. He's one of the chapter members. So the question from Hilton is that the contribution of commercial to the total load from January to June seems to be constant. And he finds that strange, you know, also considering the fact that there has been level 5 and level 4. So in terms of that commercial load contribution being constant, what's your take on that, Alois?
So from what you have seen from a contribution perspective is a static view. It is not diversified. So it is based on the maximum or the maximum demand that we have seen for that particular month, which means that the contribution for that particular sector for that month would be the same because it's a static one and it's not diversified. What I was saying earlier was that what we need to look at further is for the particular evening and the morning peaks, how does those contributions shift? Because it's true that they will not be the same.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. And the next one, I think it's more of a comment from Kevin. Kevin Klein-Hans. He is saying that what would be of interest would also be the impact of peaks of COVID infection versus the curves. So the peaks of COVID infections against the curves, and I guess that is probably one of the curves that you were showing there.
Yes. Thank you for that comment.
Okay.
We'll take it into consideration with future things.
Yes. Perhaps something to investigate going forward, and to see if there is anything anything to take from that. And the next one is from Solani. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think thank you so much for that, because we've limited the study to just looking at economy and demand, but we do realize that there is a population impact which is not considered in this particular discussion. And so, yes, it's a very valid point and something that we will definitely look at. Thank you.
Yeah. Right, and also from one of our members, again, Zalani Mkwena. Zalani refers to a specific slide number 6, and he says, I would have thought the residential will follow the same trend as redistributors. Any insight as to why this is not the case?
This residential that's reflected here is Eskom direct residential. So it is a contribution to the larger within the redistributor. There's residential as well.
Yeah.
I think if I remember the slide correctly, he's referring to the fact that there seems to be a drop off within the residential sector, whereas within the redistributor there's a pickup. That's what he's meaning.
Yes.
So yes. And the reason why you are seeing that is that the reason why there's a shift from that particular residential sector is because it is taken up within the redistributor. So it is the residential sector that you're seeing is purely Eskom supplied. It is not the full complement of residential.
Yeah. And perhaps just to add as well, that most of the residential that Eskom supplies would be mainly your rural and predominantly lower LSMs as compared to the redistributor.
Yes.
So obviously perhaps there is a dynamic there as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Then the next one is, I think it's more of a comment and a question at the same time. That's from our member, Vasu. Vasu is with eThekwini Municipality. So Vasu says, thanks for an informative presentation. Please talk briefly about KZN's recovery. He would like to know what's happening in his space. Do you have anything for KZN specifically?
Let me just go back to my slide on the regional side for KZN. Looking at KZN, you can see that KZN is showing on level 5, they've shown a 91%. And then you can actually see in level 4, they show a 96%, and in level 3 as well. Remembering KZN, I think it's largely manufacturing. So they show typical recovery that you would be expecting as the lockdown levels were eased.
Okay, all right. Vasu, I think we can also see if the discussion can carry on even offline, and let's see if that can be investigated any further as well. I mean, that there is nothing stopping us from that, especially because he's a member of the chapter. So the next one is from Hilton again, Hilton Bartman. He's concerned about the Northern Cape. He says that the Northern Cape demand normally refers, was it compared to previous year's data to see if this kind of sudden drop off can happen? and not just similar months, but a general behavior.
Okay, so because it wasn't compared to previous months' behavior, because it would not have a COVID impact. This particular behavior, the reason why we're calling it an anomaly, it is just in context of the lockdown levels being eased. So the anomaly that we are describing is the fact that you would expect, as the lockdown levels were eased and industry was recovering and production was increased, you would expect a certain type of behavior from a consumption perspective. And that's the context of this discussion. So the short of the answer is we haven't compared it with previous ones. What we can do, which we will take forward, is to look at what is the normal production, if you'd like, for that particular province with that sector, as part of the information to give us guidance into why are we seeing this particular anomaly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Alois. Then the next one is from our past president, Jacob Machinjike. He's saying well presented and well informative. Thanking you, Alois. I think that's just a comment.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next one is from Yana. Okay, this is a bit long. Let me see. Yana Briet, and she is with you in your section. It looks like it's a comment. She says, we still need to look into exact impact, but when looking at Western Cape, it was interesting that they showed a decline in demand when their perceived peak happened in June. It appears that the province technically showed level 5 demand. Level 5 demand. Basically, I think what she's saying is that that's the comment from Yana. It's not necessarily a question. Do you want to say anything there?
No, I think that is the other anomaly. What was quite interesting, and because we looked at the actuals as well, and there's about a 200 megawatt play between the numbers. So we do know that schools opened during that time as well. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. What was causing that shift? Because it is not a major shift from the one level to the next one.
Yeah. Okay. So then Stuart Michi, I think. Let me just get the full name here. Yeah. So Stuart is asking a short question here. Was the June peak reduced by load shedding?
No, we did not have load shedding in June. If you're talking about the demand for which one? The demand for June actually shows if you compare it to February of 2020, you could see that the levels, there's a 2% deviation between the forecasted value and the actual value. The month of June was high because we had very cold weather.
Okay.
So we've actually seen the opposite. Instead of a significant reduction, we've actually seen the month of June significantly increase due to the cold spike.
Yeah. Okay, so and then the next one, I think again, it's from Hilton. It's a comment. He says, "Thank you for the presentation, valuable information, insights into the redistributor contribution and its breakdown would add immense value to such discussion." So meaning perhaps a more in-depth look into the redistributors side. I think perhaps, sorry, if I can just also come in there, we do have few redistributors, I think even on the line. So I hope you guys are listening. Maybe we can have a view, you can come forward and share a view as you see it from the perspective of the redistributor, and let's see what is happening in terms of the details, the sector behavior within the territory of the redistributor. I think that's actually a very good comment there by Hilton. So then the next one is is Eskom experiencing any type of alarming surge in any of the sectors? Is there any alarming surge an alarming surge in any of the sectors? I think it's probably a surge in demand, a sudden increase in demand. Yeah.
The only surge that you have seen so far, and I'm now talking national demand, has been the month of June. But looking at the sectoral contributions, even for the month of June, there hasn't, the only significant increase that we have seen from a sectoral perspective is the redistributor. They have increased from a 45 to a 47, so there was a 3% increase, and it's the only one that really spiked, if you'd like, during that time. So it can be that it could be that it is attributed to the fact that it was very cold weather, but other than that, we haven't seen, there isn't anything that is a major anomaly other than the redistributor sector.
Okay, all right, and the next question is from Ati. Ati Senegal, one of our Load Research Chapter members as well. So he says, no question, but very interesting, especially the observed change in national consumption profile over the period. Thank you. I don't know, Ati, or any one of the members that is here. I remember, well, several of the members that are here attended our previous roundtable discussion on a similar topic. I'm sure if you can revisit that discussion, you will see quite a few similarities to what was discussed back then. And that's one of the reasons I got excited when I saw this contribution by Alois. So the next one is from Poppy Milado, Queen Milado. Queen says, in my view, domestic demand, residential demand doesn't have much impact on power grid as constant loads, that is smelters, heavy industrial loads, and mining plants. So basically saying that the domestic or / residential is not as impactful as compared to the heavy industry. She carries on and says, what is your view on the availability sourced from renewables, especially solar, which can have off residential peak for areas with high solar penetration and to some degree with wind plants? So what is your view on the main contributors on the current load shedding? So it's a two-part question. The first one is, what's your view on the availability sourced from renewables, especially the solar, and also the contributors to load shedding?
Okay, let me answer the first part of the question first. My view on the availability of renewables, specifically solar, the types of contributions that we get from renewables is a contribution that is largely during the day. So currently on the power system, we have PV and wind, which is high penetration. Solar is not as high. It is the only one at this point in time that has storage capability. So you could extend it into evening peak. But generally, the graph for a PV renewable plant would be peaking in the middle of the day. Wind is diverse in that you can get contributions in the morning, you can get them in the middle of the day, you can even get them in the evening, and they are also they are seasonal, and then they are region specific. So yes, from wind you can possibly get contributions in the evening peak. So there's this distinction between the summer profile, a summer demand constraint, and a winter profile or winter constraint. Generally, what you would see in a summer profile is that the summer profile with the morning and the evening peak, the deviation between the two peaks is not that much, meaning that should you have a constraint in the summer period, generally your constraint would be for the entire day, and because the morning and the evening peak does not deviate by much, which means the contributions of renewables specifically for summer is great, because it alleviates the time of the day when you need it the most, which is most of the day. Solar, yes, it's good. Only the ones that we have, which is in comparison to the rest of the renewable plant, it's a very small percentage. Talking about the winter profile and how that contributes, and from a constraint perspective, I think I'm answering the second question as well. From a constraint perspective, generally, if you have a typical winter profile, you'd find that the morning and the evening peak deviate by a significant amount. It could be maybe 2,000 megawatts, which is the deviation. So when you are looking at the constraint on the power system from a winter peak, winter profile perspective, the contribution that renewables make is mostly during the day, and that's great. But in the evening, you still have to supplement that, because the contributions then can reduce. And yes, you do sometimes get contributions from wind, but it is not that significant that it can actually get you through the evening peak. So pausing on the evening peak specifically, I said that the differences between morning and evening peak can be about 2,000 megawatts. Now, talking about the ramp up just for that evening peak, you can easily have an increase for an evening peak between 1,000 to 2,000 or maybe 2,500 megawatts. That's just the ramp up. So what I'm saying is that when you're talking about a constraint for the winter peak, that is the type of constraint that is the type of mitigation that you need, or the alleviation that you need. And yes, renewables does help, but it is generally a type of summer alleviation mitigation strategy that it works better in the summer. Not that it doesn't assist in the winter, but the winter constraint is different. I think I have.
Yeah, and maybe just a question from my side, your view in terms of putting the energy storage in between, deploying more energy storage. Do you think that it would assist, especially in terms of these ramps that are required, these high ramp rates?
Definitely, it would assist from a ramp rate perspective. If let me just make a speculative example. Let's say the renewable contribution for the winter period is about 2,500 megawatts during the day. Let's say it max at 2,500. So in the evening, that 2,500 megawatt may not all be fully available. So let's say 1,500 of that is available, or maybe even 500, because you only have CSP of 500. So the remaining of that megawatts must be supplied from other plants. And if you have storage that it is least, maybe it's 1,000 or 1,500, at least you can alleviate the reliance on the peak plants that now needs to fill the gap. So it would definitely make a significant difference.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Alois. Then the next one, which seems to be the second last question. Let me see. Okay, no, maybe not. So this one is from Felix Asoba. A very informative presentation. Thanks, Alois. What should we expect going forward in the coming months? What is going to happen in the near future? Yeah.
What we have seen with the demand recovery, and we have only talked about demand recovery. I have not even touched on the energy aspects, because from an energy perspective, the world looks a little bit different. But what we have seen from a recovery perspective, and it's early days, we are only in lockdown level 3. We have allowed ourselves time to get through at least till we get to level 0. With the current recovery, the month of July's data is not in yet. But if June was anything to go by, we saw a 2% deviation between what we forecasted in February compared to what we have seen from an actual perspective. So chances are that we will definitely recover, maybe not all of it, to the level or the percentage of how much that is, we don't know yet. But what we have put out is that, yes, we will probably recover from a COVID perspective, and maybe demand will be trending lower generally by maybe a 1 or a 2% or a 5%. And we are not yet sure about that number. But because we are waiting for more data and giving it a little bit more time to have a more conclusive view of what the impact is from a COVID perspective. And the good thing is there's something positive to look forward to, because we can definitely see that there is recovery. We may not recover to full where we were, but we are definitely recovering, and faster than we anticipated.
Mhm. So basically, what we are saying is, at this point, we can't really conclude and conclusively say that this is the direction we are taking, because I think, as we have heard as well, even from the health ministry, that the worst is still to come. So, and having seen that there are these correlations between how the economy does, how the levels are imposed, as well as how the demand is affected. It's pretty much anyone's guess at this point.
Yes, I think we just need to give it a bit more time, impact-wise, and wait for a little bit more of easing of lockdown levels. There will definitely be impacts, but there is also recovery.
So I think in our previous roundtable discussion, there was a view that perhaps by I think by December or so, we would be now in a position to have sufficient data to start to draw some, trends and be able to make some certain predictions. And I remember also, I see Prof. Jan is also asking a question here, but also remember that we did look at some data, and there was a view that, you know what, maybe we need to wait for more data. Do you think maybe just your thumbs up view in terms of when do you think we would have perhaps what you would say some data to really work with and start to predict the future using? Would it be December, January next year? What's your thumbs up?
My gut feel tells me that probably by December we would have enough data to guide us in some direction. Maybe we will have a view of how good is good or how bad is bad. But at this point in time, things are still changing around us, and they are changing significantly. There are variables that we have not even considered in this particular analysis, which we still have to sit down and drill down into the detail of what is the impact of the other things, because we cannot just look at the demand and economy. We haven't even spoken about energy. So there's a number of key things, I think, and we need to give it a little bit more time. But my current view tells me that maybe by December, we will be able to at least form a much better position of what the future will look like from a recovery perspective.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so Prof. Jan de Kock is asking a question there that is saying, based on your comments on PV, why are we not building it?
Why are we not building it?
How are we not building more? How are we not building? Why are we not building more CSPs?
More CSPs, because of the cost associated with CSPs is not that it's the investors that's opting for that type of technology. So the decision is not really. It is a very costly renewable plant investment that we're making. And then I know that there are other logistical constraints at some of it as well, but it is not a question of it is disallowed. It is a question of we would encourage that to be done, definitely. From our side, we would encourage it.
Yeah, but it's you're saying that it's mainly driven by private investor interest.
Yes, and cost.
And cost, yeah.
It's highly driven by the cost associated to it.
Yeah. All right. I see we have 5 minutes pretty much left here. Bobby has just she says great presentation, and let me see which question am I going to pick. There is a question from Lloyd Sitluhu. He says, very interesting presentation indeed. We need to drill down into residential sector and look at various LSMs on how the daily profiles were impacted upon by lockdown. So basically, he says ESCOM areas as well as the municipal areas. And I think I know the interest that Lloyd has you know, and it's actually something that we really want to drill down to. And I think in one of the discussions, we ended up saying that there has to be, we do have points that are being metered, so we will have data that we'll be able to revisit and have a look and actually unpack and see what exactly happened, you know, and have some debriefing from that data. Let me pick this question from Tolani. Again, Tolani says, could we potentially see an overshoot in demand recovery with more easing as businesses try to recover lost time? Are we going to see some kind of an overshoot? Is that something that you would think is on the cards? So meaning that going above what we have seen before in terms of the demand?
In terms of the demand, looking at the June projection, for June we're seeing a 2% deviation, and that's largely due to the cold spell. My feeling tells me that probably in July and August, we need to wait for that data to understand exactly when we'll be finding ourselves from an overshoot perspective. Because what we're seeing at the moment is that the winter tariff is in place from June till August. So it has an impact on industry. So you have, on the one side, things being constrained because of one area, but then you have on the other side, growth being or increases happening because of releasing of lockdown levels. If we have whether we have an overshoot, I do know that we're going to have an increase in demand. If you're meaning overshoot compared to what we have projected in February 2020 forecasting, if I have to base it on what I'm seeing for June, I think we would be maybe on par, maybe just higher by a 1%, or maybe just on par, just recovering, if we remain in lockdown level 3. If we introduce more sectors, lockdown level 2, because in lockdown level 3 we don't have any, the tourism side of it, nothing has increased there, even though it's not an energy intensive sector, but there could be recovery in that. So probably as level 2, we are expecting that there will be an increase, maybe not an overshoot, but there will definitely be a recovery.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, colleagues. I think I will just end it here in terms of questions and answers. We will, please do send your questions. Please do post them on that chat box. We will take this chat box and send it to Louise and her team, and they can respond to these questions, and we will post them on the website, as you see the one that's shown on the screen. And so please, we encourage you to carry on with, you know, posting more questions. So just back to now where we started. Basically, we are a load research chapter, as I mentioned at the beginning. And if you are interested to join us and take part in, you know, in what we do and contribute to the industry, please be in touch with Lloyd Sitlogo. There is his email on the screen, or you can visit our website. We have the content that we have shared before. It's within the SAIE website. You go to sections, and within sections you look for Load Research Chapter. Then in there you will find the content. And now, thanks once again. We please look out for, you know, on the SAIE social media pages for future talks and webinars. We have a seminar that will be running on the 18th of August as the Load Research Chapter. That will be announced as indicated there. It will be announced on the SAIE media pages. It will also be sent to all those who receive our emails. And obviously in between, there are other SAIE SST talks. Appreciation to you for taking your time and coming to listen to what we have to share with you. Thank you so much. Till we meet again. Cheers, guys.